Hello everyone. In this lesson, we're going to be texturing our character in Substance Painter. Prepare all the textures, masks, and assemble the final shader in Blender. But before baking, let's prepare our model first. I assembled our geometry in several groups. All of them, as you can see, are now separated by color. I did this in order to be able to bake information about curvature or ambient occlusion for each group separately. When baking, this approach would give us more flexibility in working with texture. I would also like to point out again the way we did the UV for the horse's eyes. Usually the eyes for the character are made on a separate UV island, since it expands the possible methods of texturing. But in our case, I didn't do it because I knew that we will not have big plans for the horse according to the story. Now the preparation is completed, and we can select all the objects and use the export function. I usually use OBJ or FBX format. And in our case, it is more preferable to use FBX because it can transfer both objects and materials, which is very useful for complex texturing. Now we can name the object and press export. In Substance Painter, we create a new project. Specify the texture size in 2K, the same as when we baked it. Leave the rest of the values as default. And select our object. In the import field, in backend maps, you can load our displacement. And here we see our geometry in the scene. Also in the texture set window, we see the created UDIM. In the same way we can see in UV space by pressing F3, but in order to go back, use the drop-down menu or the hotkey F2. In texture set settings, we can find all the necessary settings for baking. Press Bake Maps. Choose the right texture size. Turn off Bake Normal Map, because all the information is stored in the displacement. We also don't need the ID map. And now let's make a preliminary baking. Now we're going to see how everything is baked and if there is anything we don't like. We'll fix the maps in the settings. Now we can go through the whole list and check the quality of baking. World Space Normal is always baked okay. So now let's take a look at ambient occlusion. As we see, the range of values are good, but the shadow of the glasses, the collar, and the tail part, which we can see on the body, we don't need. So we'll go into the Bake Off setting. Choose Ambient Occlusion, and under the tab Self Occlusion, choose Only Same Mesh Name, and Bake. We'll work with this kind of ambient occlusion. Let's do the same for the curvature map. Let's choose the same mesh and bake it. Now let's take a look at the curvature. Basically, it is a good result, except for some artifacts, in the form of steps on the body. It's easily solved if we pitch the high polygonal source. But in our case, I won't do it because I don't need a quality curvature on my body. And now I can proceed to texturing. Let's start by figuring out what result we want to achieve. If we analyze the references, we can note that the horse skin is quite dark, almost black. Even on brown-colored horses, it's clearly visible in the eye area where the fur is almost gone. The same thing we see in the mouth and nose area. Also, there are breeds with white color as well. We will strive for one of these results. For the basics, I will use dark rock, and therefore the color of my skin will also be dark. Let's create a new shader, and the first thing I'll do is rebuild the details we got on the sculpture, and put it in the height channel. I will now create several folders. Each folder will hold one material. Accordingly, I will have a folder for metal, for leather, a folder for eyeglasses, and for the horse's body. Now let's create a base shader for each object. First I'll start with the body of the horse. Now my main task is to pick up the right skin tone and also roughness value. I will make a mask on the folder. Usually I do a black mask. Usually in this mode, I have to allocate much less. Now by selecting the mask, I activate the Polyfill tool. And the tool itself is in the Mesh Fill mode. And I'll highlight the body of the horse. Also for convenience, you can add here lips and teeth. Next, I'll do the same thing with the rest of the elements. But as a basic shader, I use blanks which are in the Substance Painter library. This makes the process easier, and allows you to get a nice result already in the first stages of the process. And most importantly, it gives us an understanding of which direction we should move forward. When a basic shader has been assigned on all the basic elements, you may proceed to work out with each surface individually. The first thing I'm going to do is to modify the skin. For the basic shader, I will use Leather Stylized Shader. It has a nicer color value and roughness, but totally lacks texture. And for texture, I will use more appropriate shader. And I'm going to turn off those channels that I don't need. I will resize the texture size with UV transformation. As we have just begun our process, now it's already important to see more correct value of roughness. For that, go to the Shader Settings tab and change Quality Value to High. Let's give the skin a more natural look. I'll start by correcting the color and making it darker. Maybe even almost black. And remove the lightening of the edges that come from curvature. If we look at our references, we can notice that the horse's harness is made of high-quality leather. The texture is quite smooth, and wrinkles are visible only on the folds. Also, you might notice that the ends of the leather are also treated with something. Let's try to make one of those effects too. I will switch to View Layout, and create a shader for the end part. I'm going to make it a red color so that it's more visible when highlighting. Now I'm going to create a mask on this shader. And by Polygon Fill tool, I will highlight the end part. When the desired elements are highlighted, you can get rid of such clear highlighting. To do this, create a filter on the mask and choose Blur as the filter. Now I'll pick the right shade on the end part in the shader and adjust roughness for it. To get rid of the textures on the ends, I'll go through all the channels and see which channel it's in. In my case, it is height. So in a channel selection, I will select height. And for the shader, in the end, I will change the blending mode to normal. And here we have it with a smooth surface. To add new information there, I will create another fill layer inside our material and in the height channel. I will select a suitable grunge map. We got a pretty good base, but it lacks traces of use on it. So I will create 2 more folders for the dirt and scratches. I will place the dirt folder above the main layer, and the scratches, or rather such a rough skin, will lie beneath the basic layer. It's also important to make sure that the height values of the base skin and of the rough skin are not mixed. For this, we switch the height blending value to normal. I will now do a mask on the base skin layer, and they will be blended through the paint's texture. But since that texture covers the entire surface of the skin, we will need to draw only certain zones where this texture should appear. To do this, let's do a paint layer over the vein texture and paint over the entire skin surface. Now, by working carefully with a brush, you can wipe down the areas where we want to see small cracks. We have got a pretty simple setup with which we can make old and badly chapped skin effects. So I used it only in some places. Probably the more correct method of aging would be to age through a basic texture of the surface. For this, I'll have to rebuild the shader a bit. In this case, the first layer is color and roughness information. And on the top layer, there's information about texture. It's not very comfortable to work with, and that's why we swap them around. But once we've done that, the value of our height overlapped with the height which lies in the color layers. It is easy to correct by changing the height blending mode of the color layer to linear dodge mode. Now let's make an anchor point on the layer with the texture. This modifier will let us collect the height information on any layer that is above. Now we need auxiliary material on which all the actions of work with the mask will take place. I'm going to turn off all its channels so we can work with it more clearly. I'll do a fill layer on it. Leave it only on the color channel and on the anchor points tab. I will take our anchor. Let's switch the reference channel to height and press auto button in levels parameters. This will automatically align the entire range of colors. Over the fill layers, let's create a paint layer. Choose the black color and paint over everything with black. Turn on at paint layer Add Sub Blending mode. And now use a large soft brush to draw on the surface. And notice that the mask begins to appear gradually and is quite controllable. Now on this layer, let's make another anchor that we will use as a mask. On the mask of the main layer, let's make another fill layer and let's select our anchor mask. Let's make the invert of anchor mask. And at the fill layer, we will make the multiple blending mode. As you can see, our structure works and it's pretty easy to edit. But it looks a little wrong. To make it correct, on the layer where we draw our mask, open the fill layer setting where we take the anchor height and make an invert. That way we get the effect that the skin is getting old and cracks at the seams in places where the texture is sagging. If we use this construction wisely and accurately, then it can have quite a natural look. Now let's pick a more appropriate metal shader. A little digging in the library, I think I found quite a good option. The original shader looks a little bit rough, so we fix it now. I'll start by picking a more correct texture size so that it fits well with the size of the skin texture. And I will choose the correct value of roughness. Next to me, I'm holding a photo. I use it as a reference when I set up the shader. This version is fine for me. The metal came out with details and doesn't look like it's badly damaged. You can also add detailing in the form of rust to our metal material. On the reference, you can clearly see how the rust covers the metal parts in the form of small dots. Such a nature of rust is related to micro impacts that these elements have received. First, let's look for the rust shader in the library. As you can see, we have a lot to choose from, and we'll use one of them. I will put the shader in a folder, and on the folder, I will make a black mask. Make a fill layer on the mask, and in a list of faceted textures, I'm looking for something in the form of spots. By taking one of these textures, I will resize it, so that it fits more closely to the reference. Also, the rust now looks pretty light. So you can change color by making it more dark, and now it looks more like rust. Like dirty dots with a little rusty patina. At the very edge of the texture, you can add a little constant. This will both accentuate the rust spots and hide the excess spotting of the grunge. In the grunge setting, let's change the height position to slightly sync the texture itself, so that it is more like dents. You can make the effect of dustiness of the entire surface. I mean the surfaces of leather and metal elements. For this, I create another material. I set the roughness value to 1, and for color, I'll pick a grunge texture. I usually use the shaders I've already prepared, but this time I wanted to do something simple. For grunge, use Cloud 3, and adjust the scale of the texture so that it is a little bit smaller. Now for the base color, I will create a filter. First, I'll use Sharpen to make the noise seem more gritty. And in a second filter, I'll do a gradient. This incredibly useful tool allows you to remap black and white image into color. And now for each range of tones, I choose the right color. Getting that texture in the form of yellow spots. Let's make a mask on our layers. For the mask, let's create a generator. Choose dirt from the list of generators. It's not the neatest, but it's the quickest way to get a dirt mask. I will set up dirt like this, so that we can see it, but it's not too dominant on the texture. And changing the settings a little bit, I ended up with this result. I tried to keep the balance between the aging effects and the pure texture, and tried not to overdo it with the dirt so that the surface doesn't look untidy. The material of the glasses I will make quite conditional by choosing a color and picking values of roughness, taking into account that later I will adjust it directly in the UF renderer. Now let's do the horse. I've already separated the elements by shader and put each one in a different folder. I'll start from the body. On the main skin shader, I will create a fill layer. And I'll pick a nice grunge texture for the colors texture. This fractal should be fine. Now we'll do the same that we did with the dust shader. I.e., I create a gradient filter and pick shades close to the photo reference. And color selector helps me with this. With it, we can retrieve the value of colors directly from the image. That's the approach that won't give us an exact result, but we'll be able to pick a base color of shades much faster. By experimenting with different values, I settled on this result. But it came out pretty light. So I create an HSL filter and darken it in main color with the lightness parameter. For hooves, I will try to find some basic natural shader. Very often, wood textures are used for horns and hooves. At certain processing of such a texture, a quite realistic result can be achieved. In our case, I use wood rough shader, and with the paint mask, I will draw the necessary area. Now I make a basic texture shade darker and with a reddish hue. In order to make more detail on a texture, I will use our baked curvature. Apply it to the color of the material. With the help of levels, we can make our curvature more contrasting and try to highlight the tips of the hooves. We mix this texture with the main layer via screen. And so it doesn't look so contrasting, I'll add blur. Darker areas can be drawn in a separate layer. With a red tint, I carefully work out the entire surface of the hoof and try to repeat the same drawing that I have on my reference. Now let's move on to the teeth. On top of the main shade, I'll create another shader and make it red. And mix it with the base color using ambient occlusion mask. You can blur the ambient occlusion a little bit if it looks a little messy. I'll make another paler burgundy layer. With the brush, I'll gently wipe down the center part of my teeth, giving them more detail and volume. Make a little texture with creases soft and use it as a hide. Adjusting the range of height, we will get such a result. The same height we can put on the color in overlay mode, so that we can emphasize the unevenness of the teeth. Now we can make the lips. On top of the main colors, I'll make another auxiliary, more red hue shader. And as a blending mask, I'll use our displacement. And adjust the range this way, so that the red hue will be in the recesses of the lip folds. This result would be okay for me. I will also cover the transition area with just a brush, taking the color I want from the horse's body. Also, I might add a picture variability so that it doesn't look like just a gradient transition. I'll add spots of different sizes to make the transition zone more expressive. I'll do the same with my nose with a regular brush. I'll draw a few spots and then I'll add color variation. Now let's do the texture of the eye. Normally, I do this procedural texture in Substance Designer, or find a picture of a good size. In our case, I just decided to draw it. During the animation, our eyes will be permanently hidden behind the glasses, and so some basic traits that are inherent to the eye of the horse would be quite enough. The finishing touch would be a tattoo. There is such a detail on the concept, and we must also implement it. I made this drawing beforehand in Vector Editor and transferred our project. I'll do another material for the tattoo, and leave it as a component with a color. Put in the color over texture and choose the planar projection method. Now with the manipulator, I'll put our texture in the right place and scale it up to the right size. So it doesn't repeat, in the UV Wrap tab, I will choose None. We finished texturing. We have to unload our textures from the Substance Painter. For it, on the File tab, we select the Export Textures procedure. Specify the folder to save it. Also, let's specify the format of the file in which we will save and choose Output Template. In the template setting, we can set our unique preset or use an existing preset. Arnold Rendering preset suits us. All we have to do is hit the Export button. Well, that brings us to the final stage. Now we'll assemble the shader and set it up. I created a shader based on the Bezier principle and assigned it to the horse's body. Now let's use the browser window. Drag and drop the textures into the shader window. I will drag one texture for each channel. To start, I drag the diffuse and switch the playback mode to UDIM tiled. This way the Blender understands that there is a series of textures for diffuse. Going into shading mode in viewport, let's see how our texture behaves. This happens sometimes, but it can be fixed in the Image Editor window. Choose the texture you want from the list and click the Image tab. In the UDIM Tiles window, let's create another UDIM. After creating a new UDIM is displayed in black. What we need now is to update our texture and the whole system will work. Now let's load the main textures into the project as well. And if necessary, repeat the procedure for creating a new UDIM in the Image Editor. Diffuse method and roughness are assigned. Now let's assign a normal map. In order to properly connect it to the shader, we need a normal map. For convenience, I'll use the search. Now the normal maps too participate in shading. Looks good. But a little bit like plastic. It mainly concerns the skin of the horse. To fix it, we will use the subsurface parameter. But since we need it only on the skin, we'll split the shader. Highlight the source material and press Add New Material button, so that we create a copy of the original material but with a new title. Now let's increase the value of subsurface parameters. We'll set rather small value of this parameter because at large values our skin will look like rubber or even wax. Something we don't need. For the subsurface color, let's make a peach shade tint. It will add more color to the subsurface effect. Before rendering, let's finalize the glasses shader. I will create another duplicate of our material, and in glasses shader I will raise the transmission value to 1. Now let's see how it all looks on the render. Now the picture is more complete. And we can see all the effects that have been set up. But the glasses are still not transparent. To make them transparent, let's turn off the shader color. Now it's much better. Here we can give them the desired shade of color. Taking a closer look at the final result, we can see that in some areas the subsurface parameter is not enough. And on some of them it's too much, like on the ears. In order to fix this, we need to create an impact map of subsurface. Everything related to textures is easiest to do in the substance. For this, I will create a new folder in which I will keep the shader with the subsurface setting. Inside the folder, I will create a basic shader and turn off all channels. And now by going into the Texture tab, I click on the plus, and in the list that pops up, I'll select Emissive. There is now a new channel in our shader. Use Paint Layer to create a translucency map. And download the result. Load the new map into the Blender, and let's modify our shader a little bit. For the convenience of work, we need some parameters of the general value of subsurface. For this, we create value, which will serve for us as this parameter. Now let's use the 0 times and connect the value of the parameter and texture to it. In the rendering, we see that our shader begins to glow. It happened because we drew the map with completely white color, and by adding the two parameters, we got a value higher than 1, which is unacceptable. In order to avoid incorrect parameters, activate the clamp checkbox. And to reduce the overall value of luminosity, let's make one more normal map. Connect it in the same way, but in multiply mode. This way we first decrease the brightness value to value and then increase the total value of brightness in a black and light tones to the same value. So we did a kind of setup of the brightness offset. I like the shader much better this way, but I would like to be able to reduce the subsurface values at some areas. To do this, we again return to Substance Painter. This time I created another mask on the legs and separated both masks by color, where red is the maximum value and green is the minimum. And unload the new mask inside the shader. We will connect the texture directly into the material output so that we can check if everything was recorded correctly. Now let's break down our map into components, and using separate RGB, it gives access to each individual texture channel. Red channel we plug into our ready shader. And in order to connect the green channel, we use Mix Node. And connect the green channel to the gray input, which is the mask. And we will connect the most extreme node map, in which the total value of the subsurface is stored, to the first channel, and the value of the second channel set in black. Our final shader is ready. Now we can connect the displacement maps, which we sculpted earlier, and see the final result with all the details. And this lesson is over. Goodbye, everyone.